Tonight at 10, the radical plans to change the parliamentary boundaries for the House of Commons. There'd be 50 fewer MPs and an attempt to give constituencies an equal number of voters, but many MPs are unhappy.
There is an absence of fairness in these proposals, which I don't think the British people will like.
We'll have the details, and we'll be asking what impact the plans might have on the parties. Also tonight,
welcome to the Great British Bake Off. Flora, would you like to bring
the Great British Bake Off is on the move, but Mel and Sue say they will not be following the dough to Channel 4. A special report from Mosul on the battle against Islamic State in Iraq's second city. Health and the presidency. Clinton supporters say their candidate gets far more scrutiny than Trump does. And another great day for Paralympics GB. 3 more golds, including Rob Davis in the table tennis.
In the south, the return of a deadly disease. Pregnant women urged to get immunised against whooping cough. And Georgie does it again, a second Paralympic gold for the girl from Guildford.
Good evening. Controversial plans for redrawing the parliamentary constituency boundaries in England and Wales were published today. They're part of a wider scheme to cut the number of MPs in the House of Commons by 50 and to give constituencies roughly the same number of voters. The plans would mean, for example, Wales losing a quarter of its seats and dozens of MPs, including Jeremy Corbyn and George Osborne, looking for a new constituency. Labour says that the plans, in its view, are undemocratic. Plans for Scotland are expected at the end of October, as our political correspondent Vicky Young explains.
Every 5 years we elect members of Parliament from all over the UK to represent us at Westminster. But the government thinks the current system's unfair and is redrawing the map. Here in the Midlands, major changes are on the cards. Ministers want to cut the cost of politics by axing the number of MPs.
It's very weird, isn't it?
At the moment, these 3 Labour MPs represent Stoke, but the new map shows that being reduced to 2 at the next election.
I've got 19 houses or something.
Which will mean Friends fighting it out for the new seats.
What we're seeing under these Tory plans is a wholesale assault on Labour constituencies from Wales to Stoke-on-Trent to the North East. So there is an absence of fairness in these proposals.
The Boundary Commission are effectively downgrading the importance of cities like Stoke-on-Trent.
Giving each constituency roughly the same number of voters could make it harder for Labour to win the next election. The party performs better in urban seats like Stoke, which tend to have fewer voters. Under the plans, every constituency will have between 71 and 78,500 voters. So in England, the number of MPs will fall from 533 to 501. From 40 to 29 in Wales, from 59 to 53 in Scotland, and from 18 to 17 in Northern Ireland. There will be exceptions. Orkney and Shetland and the Western Isles will have fewer voters, as will the 2 new constituencies on the Isle of Wight.
The government's determined that every seat should be equal. Currently, we have seats which are 3 times the size of another, which means that one elector's vote is worth 3 times that of another. That's simply not fair, which is why we're determined to ensure that we have equal-sized constituencies, which is why this review has been enacted.
But some of the plans are controversial. For the first time, a new constituency will straddle the Cornwall-Devon border across the Tamar, and there's strong local opposition.
We're one county, they're another county. Why don't they just keep it to themselves?
I think it would work fine because, you know, we're all very similar, Devon and Cornwall.
For Labour, there's another dimension to these boundary changes. All 3 of the MPs here in Stoke have been really critical of Jeremy Corbyn's leadership. And his supporters have already raised the possibility of using the shake-up of constituencies to get rid of these MPs and bring in their own people, potentially changing the face of the Labour Party.
In terms of anyone trying to exploit this for political gain, for making this about them and not about the people we choose to serve, they should be ashamed of themselves.
This process has been likened to a game of musical chairs, but MPs in the House of Lords still have to approve the measures, and there's a public consultation, so there's still everything to play for. Vicky Young, BBC News, Stoke-on-Trent.
There's lots of detail in the changes, of course. If you want to know how your local area could be affected by these plans, they haven't been confirmed yet, but they are plans at this point. Lots of information on our website, including a full breakdown of what is meant to be changing and where. bbc.co.uk/news, and there's also an interactive map on part of the website. You can click on that in your area and see what's being proposed. Now, the Labour MP Owen Smith, who's challenging for the Labour leadership, has suggested that Jeremy Corbyn is delusional about the party's electoral prospects and that Labour would be decimated if there was an election right now. Mr Smith called on Mr Corbyn to be more honest with the public. He was speaking to our political editor Laura Kuenssberg in the first of her interviews with the two candidates.
Hello, that's John here from the Owen Smith campaign.
It comes from the top. The leader has to be interested. The leader has to be creating policies.
You know, Owen's got a track record for taking on the Tories and beating them.
Hard going.
That's my fear.
Owen Smith's supporters try to persuade Labour members even when they're on the move. They know, and he knows, Jeremy Corbyn's the overwhelming favourite. While a room in a leisure centre is readied for another marathon of calls.
Good morning!
Labour's got to win, and with Jeremy we've got no chance of winning.
Jeremy Corbyn claims, though, that Tories are in retreat.
Well, I think that's delusional, and I think the reality is, Jeremy needs to think a bit more about that straight, honest politics he started his campaign with. The straight, honest truth is that we are right now at our lowest ebb in the polls ever. I think he's misleading himself if he thinks that we are heading towards an electoral victory.
So you are suggesting that he and some of his supporters are lying. They've said repeatedly, look, actually they've been ahead in some opinion polls. Labour's been doing well in by-elections. They've won mayoral elections.
Well, that palpably isn't true.
I mean, isn't the truth? He's been able to motivate thousands of supporters, and you haven't in the same way.
Michael Foot drew 20,000 to rallies. We've had mass rallies many times in the past. It doesn't necessarily translate into the only mass movement that really matters, which is a mass movement of people voting Labour.
He says his values are the same as the leader he's trying to beat.
We're going to ask you all to write down what is the most important thing for the next Labour Party leader.
But for some Owen Smith supporters, the most important thing seems that he is not Mr Corbyn.
Reveal your words. Unity, leadership and listening.
It feels like Jeremy just closed himself off behind the walls in the opposition office and he refuses to listen to anyone of a different opinion. It's as simple as that to me, really.
I think he's that unifying person because the Labour Party's always been a coalition of the members of Parliament and the members of the party and the trade unions.
I've written communication.
And I've written voters.
Principles.
Feminism. I think we've forgotten that we're a movement and not a man.
Don't you and your colleagues, though, in Westminster have to accept that if he wins again, the party has changed?
Well, my vision of the Labour Party is of a serious party of power, is of a party that was created, still exists in order to hold power at Westminster through the ballot box in order to change people's lives.
If you don't win this time, would you run again?
Oh, I'm not going to get into that. I'm going to wait and see what happens on
but would you
24th.
Would you rule it out?
I'm not ruling anything in or anything out, Laura, but I think that's, hypothetical question for the dim and distant future. Let's get to the 24th and see what happens then.
So what is most important to him?
That's what we need.
Labour's now huge new membership will judge if he is a priority for them. Laura Kuenssberg, BBC News, Stevenage.
Now, the day after Channel 4 announced it had bought the rights to the BBC series The Great British Bake Off, the programme's presenters announced that they would not be carrying on with the show. Sue Perkins and Mel Gedroich said that they were saddened the programme would be moving from its home and they wouldn't be going with the dough, as they put it. The BBC says it was unable to afford the sum being demanded by the production company, as David Sillito tells us.
3 weeks in, 12 bakers down to 10. They're on a roll. As are we.
Mel and Sue, the presenters of Britain's biggest show.
Welcome to the Great British Bake Off.
But it's not welcome today. It's goodbye. Following the decision to move to Channel 4, they issued a statement saying, "We were very shocked and saddened to learn yesterday evening that Bake Off will be moving from its home. We've had the most amazing time on Bake Off, and I've loved seeing it rise and rise like a pair of yeasted Latvian baps. We're not going with the dough. We wish all the future bakers every success. This is a £75 million transfer deal that didn't automatically come with the team, but they do have the format, and after years of running programming at BBC and ITV, one TV boss thinks that's good enough.
The show is very, very strong. I think it would be a tougher call if Mary Berry and Paul Hollywood don't do the show. But I think if there are new presenters, it's the same show, it's baking, things rise, things fall, it's still going to be a hit.
But there's another issue about this bake-off deal. Yes, the BBC was outbid by £10 million by a commercial rival. It is just business after all. But there is a question about that rival being Channel 4. Because this government-owned TV business is in a fight, trying to fend off privatisation by saying its reputation for innovation and trying out new formats could be lost. So how does this deal fit in? One former boss isn't impressed.
They've spent 2 years arguing against privatisation, and they've now behaved precisely like a privatised, fully privatised company. This deal looks to me to be in complete denial of their statutory remit to cater for tastes and interests not catered for on other channels. I think it's a shocking, shocking deal for Channel 4.
Channel 4, in its defence, says its public service programming is at a record level. But this battle does also illuminate how TV has changed. This is Italian Bake Off. This German Bake Off. And both will continue to be made by the BBC. But they don't own the format, the intellectual property.
Independent producers own their own intellectual property. That's one of the things, by the way, which has made independent production in the UK investable. It's turned it into a global leader, which in this sort of programming, there's no question that British independent production is a global leader. So, all to the good. The problem is, when it comes to the end of a contract, the BBC doesn't own it.
So, we don't know the winner yet, but actually the Bake Off tent has already been packed away. In the past, the channels had all the power. But these days, increasingly, they're just customers. David Sillito, BBC News.
The World Anti-Doping Agency said tonight that confidential data relating to the Rio Olympics had been stolen by Russian hackers, including records for Serena and Venus Williams and the US gymnast Simone Biles. The Kremlin has denied categorically any involvement. Our sports correspondent Natalie Perks is with me. Let's talk about what's been accessed, Natalie, and possibly why.
Well, these hackers call themselves Fancy Bears. That's their name. And it says it stands for Fair and Clean Sport. Now, they've hacked into the ADAM system, which is the whereabouts system where athletes can tell drugs testers where they're going to be. And then they've leaked confidential medical data online, essentially alleging that WADA, the World Anti-Doping Agency, knew athletes were taking banned substances this summer. Now, in the case of Simone Biles, of course, won 4 gold medals in the gymnastics, it was a drug used to treat ADHD. And the key thing is that she and other athletes mentioned have done nothing wrong here. The drugs, the substances mentioned in the leaks had therapeutic use exemptions, TUEs, which means that they were allowed to use them for a specific medical reason. Now, Biles has tweeted tonight that taking medication for her condition is nothing to be ashamed of, but the US Anti-Doping Agency has blasted the hacks as cowardly and despicable. Of course, the link will be made to the McLaren report, which alleged state-sponsored Russian doping. Of course, it led to more than 100 Russians being absent from the Games this summer. The Kremlin tonight said it's out of the question that it was involved in the hacks, but the hackers have said there are more revelations to come, and it will be about other nations. Of course, that could include Team GB.
OK. Natalie, again, thanks very much for the update. Natalie Perks there for us. Let's have a brief look then at some of the day's other news stories now. The chair of the BBC Trust, Rona Fairhead, is to step down early next year. She was meant to stay on to chair the new BBC board, the new body, but she's now been told by the Prime Minister she'd have to apply for that position. She said in a statement that she decided not to re-enter the process. HMRC says it will not extend its existing contract with Concentrix, that's a company it employs to check entitlement to tax credits, after the BBC learned that hundreds of low-income families complained that their tax credits had been cut in error. The contract will expire next May. Police investigating a racially aggravated assault have released a CCTV image of a man that they would like to question. A pregnant woman lost her baby as a result of the attack, which happened last August in Bletchley in Buckinghamshire. Another person suffered head injuries. The Scottish nurse Pauline Caffergy, who contracted Ebola in West Africa in 2014, will not face charges of dishonesty at a misconduct hearing. The panel has agreed to drop a charge that she acted dishonestly when her temperature was recorded during screening at Heathrow Airport. Now, Hillary Clinton, the Democratic candidate for the US presidency, has faced extensive criticism, even from some supporters, for failing to be more open about her health problems and her pneumonia. She was apparently concerned that news of the illness would be exploited by her political opponents. But her supporters also claim that she faces a far higher level of scrutiny than her Republican rival Donald Trump. Our North America editor John Sopel has been comparing differences in media treatment.
From the word go, this has been an election unlike any other. The outsider versus the insider, man versus woman, the insurgent against the establishment, the consummate politician up against the billionaire TV reality star. And it's resulted in very different treatment of the two candidates.
And here's the paradox. Hillary Clinton is seen as furtive and secretive, while Donald Trump is perceived as open, candid, with nothing to hide. And yet Hillary Clinton has revealed much more. This is her most recent tax return, all 40 pages of it. Donald Trump has refused to release his. This is Hillary Clinton's letter from her doctor, going into details about her most recent mammogram and her blood pressure, heart rate, respiratory rate. While Donald Trump's doctor issued 4 brief paragraphs with the title, "To Whom My Concern."
So why the differing levels of scrutiny? Janelle Ross and Aaron Blake write the fix for the Washington Post, the detailed analysis of the 2016 campaign.
The coverage of the two of them has certainly been different. Part of the reason for that is because Hillary Clinton has been in the public eye for the better part of a quarter century. Donald Trump has been in the public eye, but in a much different way. He's basically been an entertainer, a TV host, kind of this mythical real estate figure.
I do think that you hear certain words used in descriptions of Clinton that you do not hear in descriptions of Trump or any other male candidate, in particular. Allegations that she's shrill, that she's bossy, perhaps overbearing, that she's manipulative.
And Aaron says there's only so much that journalists can do when the public seem not to care.
The media has been very tough on Donald Trump. They've pointed out the many controversial things he said, the many false things he's said, and many people in this country just decided that that doesn't really matter to them.
And that's the thing. A large section of the American public loves that Donald Trump isn't a conventional politician and don't expect him to behave like one. They may both be applying for the same job, but they're running entirely different campaigns and being held to entirely different standards. John Sopel, BBC News, Washington.
The ceasefire in Syria, which started yesterday, seems to be holding in most areas, and the UN says it's now vital that food and medical supplies are allowed in, especially to the long-suffering people of Aleppo. The 7-day truce is meant to stop the fighting between Syrian government forces and a wide range of opposition groups. If the truce holds for a week, then the US and Russia will carry out airstrikes on militant groups, including so-called Islamic State. So far in this conflict, more than 300,000 deaths have been confirmed. The actual figure is thought to be much higher. And one of the worst-hit areas is the city of Aleppo, divided between the rebel-controlled east and the government-held west. Our Middle East editor, Jeremy Bowen, is there, and he's just sent this exclusive report.
No one is taking down the sandbags. The war spread to Aleppo in 2012. In a divided, destroyed city after thousands of deaths, with hundreds of thousands of lost homes, no wonder they're still skeptical a few hours into a ceasefire. This is the west side of Aleppo, controlled by the government. Many more have died on the east side, but the pain of death crosses the battle lines. Not much else unites a country that the war has left in fragments. A soldier showed me a shell improvised by rebels. He said they pack empty cooking gas bottles with explosives, weld on a tail, and fire them from homemade mortars.
C4. See, this is C4. So this is, he's saying that this is C4, which is an explosive. You hear a lot of that.
many by 100 by 1,000 انفجارات مو واحد.
Hundreds of thousands of explosions.
Very much.
It was a small violation of the ceasefire, but Salat Balad is haunted by years of shelling and by his grandchildren's fears. He calls rebels terrorists. He lost an eye and his son a leg to a gas bottle attack.
The murder. That is murder. Killers. They killed the children and the women. We don't know what happened to Syria.
One day the war will end and peace will start with a ceasefire.
C'est dangereux un peu, oui.
Father Elias Adas, a Maronite priest, a Christian, hopes that day has come. Rebels destroyed his church. Many Syrian Christians support the regime. Father Elias believes only negotiation will end the war. He backs the ceasefire and believes pouring more weapons into the Middle East leads to disaster.
وبنادي وبصرخ من قلب هالكنيسة.
From this church, I call on all the countries of the world to stop the arms trade. The money spent on weapons could feed many people and build a civilization of peace.
On the east side of Aleppo, which is controlled by rebels, the cemeteries are overflowing. They've faced much greater firepower than the West. Airstrikes, including barrel bombs, and more recently the power of the Russian Air Force. The ceasefire coincides with Eid al-Adha, one of the biggest Muslim holidays of the year. And despite widespread doubts that the ceasefire would last, parents here, like those near the front line in the West, took a chance.
I took my kids to the swings today. It was a risk because I don't believe in the ceasefire at all. I don't trust the regime. It's always breaking promises. But I said the kids should have fun.
I couldn't cross into East Aleppo, but this was close to the front line in the old city, a tangle of medieval alleys that used to be the greatest souk in the Levant. Aleppo's old city was an extraordinary human creation. Now it is empty and dead. The destruction here is tragic, but it doesn't match the loss of perhaps 400,000 human lives.
Now, let's assume the ceasefire lasts. First of all for a week and then perhaps for a bit longer. The question is what can be built upon it. Could there be a political process that inches this country away from war and a tiny bit towards peace? Or will it be, like other attempts at ceasefires, just a time when fighting men can rest, rearm, regroup, and get ready for the next round? Jeremy Bone, BBC News, Aleppo.
Well, the war against the so-called Islamic State is not just taking place in Syria there. Next month, the Iraqi army could begin its operation to drive IS from Mosul. In 2014, IS overran Mosul, which is Iraq's second largest city, and went on to take control of a third of Iraq, as well as key regions of Syria. Since then, IS has lost much of the territory it once held, and Iraq's Prime Minister has pledged to retake Mosul by the end of the year. The Iraqi army's most recent victory was taking back the town of Khayyara, which is some 60 kilometres south of Mosul. From there, our correspondent Ola Gerin has sent this report.
A parting gift from the so-called Islamic State. Oil wells set ablaze, covering their retreat from the town of Khayyara. Here, the landscape of liberation. Defeating IS will mean a lot more scorched earth. By the roadside, remnants of their rule. The Iraqi troops who drove them from here still jittery. Our journey was suddenly halted when a homemade bomb was found up ahead. A controlled explosion. This time. Clearing the strategic town is a key victory in the push towards Mosul. Troops are closing in step by step with help from US and British bombing raids. And what happened under the dark reign of IS is now being uncovered. We were given a tour of one of their jails. Tiny space that prisoners were kept in. Locals said up to 4 men could be crammed into a cell, forced to stand. They were even handcuffed to the doors. Here, some of their names and their crimes. Smuggling and trying to escape. We don't know their fate. For this tribal commander, the fight here is very personal and it's not over yet. His village in the distance, still under IS control.
They blew up my house. I can see it with binoculars. My mother is there. I haven't seen her for more than 2 years. It's very painful. My brothers are also there, in front of me, and I can't reach them. But we hope to retake the village soon.
Then we get access to a hidden lair built by the extremists during their 2 years in residence. Well, here, deep in the hillside, Islamic State carved out a network of tunnels and rooms. Now, this was a place where they could hide, where they could take cover from coalition airstrikes. It's pretty basic, but we have found some food supplies that they left behind in their hurry to escape. And they did have some creature comforts. There was electricity connected here. Now, they were driven out of this town in just 2 days, but the decisive battle is yet to come, the offensive for Mosul. Many have fled even before it begins. Makeshift camps in Kurdish territory are already overflowing. Here they are free of IS, but still prisoners of memory. These young boys saw men hanged and beheaded.
He was escaping, so they cut his head off. Then they threw him into the water. They brought another 5 people, also dead. Locals took the bodies and buried them.
In the coming weeks and months, the desperation here may grow, along with the numbers. The UN is warning that up to 1 million people could flee Mosul. A fresh catastrophe in this broken country. Orla Guerin, BBC News, Northern Iraq.
3 Syrian migrants arrested in northern Germany on suspicion of planning terrorist acts may have links to last November's Paris attackers. That's according to German prosecutors. The men were arrested in a series of pre-dawn raids on a number of properties, including 3 refugee centres. Investigators believe that the men had volunteered to travel to Europe and await orders to carry out attacks. The former president of Israel, Shimon Peres, has been rushed to hospital in Tel Aviv after suffering a stroke. The 93-year-old has been sedated and his condition has been described as serious. He was awarded the Nobel Peace Prize in 1994 after signing an interim peace agreement with the then Palestinian leader Yasser Arafat. Let's have a look at some of the day's football news now then. And Celtic had a bit of a miserable return to the group stages of the Champions League this evening, losing 7-0 away to Barcelona. After a 3-year absence, Brendan Rodgers' side were humiliated. Lionel Messi scored a hat-trick, and the former Liverpool striker Luis Suarez ended a night to forget for them with a 7th goal, his 2nd of the match. It was a better night for Arsenal, though, as they scored a late equaliser to earn a respectable draw for Arsène Wenger's side against the French champions, Paris Saint-Germain. Both sides ended with 10 men after Olivier Giroud tangled with Marco Verratti in stoppage time. Manchester City, though, will have to play Borussia Mönchengladbach tomorrow night after torrential rain in Manchester meant that their match was called off at the Etihad due to a rather waterlogged pitch. Now, in Rio, the success of Paralympics GB continued today following a golden night in the swimming pool, where the team claimed 3 golds in less than 40 minutes. There was a gold and a world record this afternoon in the javelin, as well as the 400 metres. This report from Andy Swiss does contain some flashing images.
For Ellie Simmonds, it's a sound and a sight that's become fantastically familiar. At just 21, this remarkably is her third Paralympics, and in last night's individual medley, she used every ounce of that experience, timing her final push to perfection. She was among 3 British champions in 38 breathtaking minutes. The most surprised, surely Susie Rogers. The most poignant, perhaps Sasha Kindred. Now at his 6th Games, his final race proved a golden one on a night when success sparked success.
I spoke to Ellie afterwards and she said, you know, she was watching my race in the pool room and she said that inspired her to take her race to the next level. So yeah, we do. We're a close-knit unit, and when one of us performs really well, it lifts the whole team.
Tonight, Ellie Simmonds has been going for her 2nd gold in less than 24 hours. Among her rivals, 15-year-old Ellie Robinson, who Simmonds inspired to swim. But neither of them could get near Yelizaveta Mereshko. Gold for the Ukrainian, while Simmonds had to settle for bronze, with Robinson 4th. Elsewhere, it was another day of elation and emotion. Rob Davis was a semi-professional rugby player until a serious spinal injury. Now he's a Paralympic table tennis champion.
Just look how much that means to Rob Davis.
It was a result, he told me, of years of dedication.
After coming from rugby, it was such a different sport. I wanted to challenge myself mentally. I knew an individual sport was a lot tougher, and I'm glad I did now. I've got my goal. It's been a long time coming, but yeah, chuffed to have this.
And still the medals keep racing in. Georgie Hermitage, who has cerebral palsy, with her 2nd title here in the 400 metres. She said she wanted to show her young daughter Tilly that anything is possible. And in the javelin, gold for 22-year-old Holly Arnold, a world record with her final throw. For Britain, another day of success in some style.
But I can tell you that in the last few minutes there's been disappointment for wheelchair racer David Weir. He could only finish 4th in the 1500 metres, but later on there could be more British success in the pool. Ollie Hind going for his 2nd gold medal of these games. So Britain with 31 gold medals at the moment. There could be more to come, Hugh.
Andy, thanks very much. Andy Swiss with the latest in Rio at the Paralympic Games. Just time to say something about today's remarkable weather. The highest September temperatures in 105 years have been recorded in some parts of Britain today. Let's have a little look at Brighton Beach there. And Gravesend in Kent hit 34.4 degrees Celsius. And that was the record. The spell of warm weather is forecast to continue across parts of England until Friday. But, and it's a big but, elsewhere in the UK there's been more extreme weather, with parts of northern and western England and southern Scotland seeing some thunderstorms and torrential rain and flash flooding. So a bit of a mixed bag. Newsnight is coming up on BBC Two and 11 o'clock in Scotland. Here on BBC One, it's time for the news where you are. Have a good night.